there is nothing wrong with seeking to improve one's status or business or anything like that. But when it becomes an idol, when it becomes our passion ahead of serving the Lord, anytime that becomes even an interference in our worship and service of the Lord, it is misplaced and idolatrous, and that idol needs to be smashed.
Scott, we're going to test your knowledge of animal husbandry today.
Oh boy, I won't know very much.
Were you a 4-H kid growing up or spend any time on the farm?
I was not, but I did spend some time on my grandparents' farm.
All right, here we go. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to name for you what an offspring is called.
Oh my.
And you're going to tell me the kind of animal that offspring comes from.
Okay.
So if I were to say puppy, you would say?
Dog.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Here we go.
All right.
Ready?
Now I'm ready.
Kit.
Fox.
Very nice. I would have accepted ferret and muskrat as well.
Okay. All right.
The next one is cria, spelled C-R-I-A, cria.
Let's see. Wow. I have no idea.
Alpaca.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. Yep, alpaca.
Wow, I should know that.
Yeah. Oh, really? Why?
Well, I lived in the Andes highlands.
Oh, okay.
And where they grow alpaca. In fact, at the 4-H shows in Bolivia,
they show alpaca.
They show alpaca.
Wow.
And so I should have known that.
Very good. Very good. Here's the next one. Ephina.
Ephina.
It's spelled E-P-H-Y-N-A. Ephina.
Platypus?
That's a jellyfish.
Okay.
That's a jellyfish baby.
All right.
Last one, we'll let you off the hook here. All right. Joey.
Well, that's a kangaroo.
Kangaroo is correct.
Okay.
I would have accepted koala, possum, and wallaby as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is Senior Pastor of East White Oak Bible Church, Scott Burkle. My name's Treg Whitaker, and this is the Ask Scott podcast. Of course, Scott, you were preaching on Sunday from Genesis chapter 30 and 31.
And I hope all the questions we're going to have are easier than those.
Much easier than those, much easier. But the reason for those questions is that here in the story of Jacob, there is a little information about ancient Near Eastern animal husbandry, right?
Yes, sure.
Goats and sheep. Did you learn anything this week from your study of...
I studied a lot about genotypes and phenotypes and zygotes and all of that, but I really honestly have to conclude that we don't know what's going on.
All right, very good. Well, there are some questions that we have about the passage today that we trust that you have the answers for.
Let's hope.
Let's get started. Here's question number 1. Jacob had traveled all this way. If you remember early on in the story, they send him away in order to find a wife.
Yes,
away from
miles.
the Canaanites, right? And it seems that he comes to this family who practices divination. Verse 27, his uncle Laban.
Right.
The message received through the divination that Laban was a part of indicates something about the Lord, though. And I trust that that's the Lord God, Yahweh, right?
He's using that word, yes.
Yeah.
Laban is.
So does the Lord use divination in this case?
Yeah, so this is a great question because it tells you how much gets left on the cutting room floor when you're doing a sermon.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
I got a whole bunch of ways to answer this.
Yeah.
Number 1 is that the Hebrew phrase could mean I've figured out how I've gained wealth from the Lord. So it's not necessarily about divination. Okay? It could mean I have divined. That is, I have figured out that it's from the Lord that I've gained this. It's also possible that he is faking it. Remember what a deceiver he is?
Sure.
So he's saying, I've heard from the Lord about this, when really he hasn't. Okay? And it could also be that he is, in fact, engaged in divination because Laban, while he can use the name of the Lord and while he can talk the religion, he himself is not a believer in the Lord. And we will find that out next week when he's really angry that his household gods have been stolen.
Yes.
and they're stolen by his daughter Rachel as Rachel is leaving, and she hides them in such a way that Laban doesn't find them.
Yeah.
And so what we've got here is a syncretism, that is a mixing of gods and all of that. And so Jacob is going up north not because he's finding a family that's so godly and wonderful. No. It's because they are not Canaanites.
Right.
And the concern is to avoid assimilation into the Canaanite world.
Yeah. So further along in the story, Laban and Jacob come to this agreement about how Jacob is going to
Yes.
Be rewarded for
Have his own stake.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they come to this conclusion about the types of animals that
Yes.
Jacob is able to keep for himself.
Right.
And the way that he goes about making sure that those types of animals are produced, here's where we get to some animal husbandry.
Yes. Right.
He puts white stripes on some sticks.
Well, actually, he strips the sticks
Strips
so
the
that
bark.
they're white, and then puts them in front of the feeding trough. And when the story is that when the animals see these white strips, that's when they're reproducing.
Yeah.
That's going to produce the animals that Jacob
Now
wants.
this does not sound very scientific to me. And neither do we have indication that it's an instruction from the Lord.
Oh, no.
So is Jacob being superstitious here? Is that what's happening?
So there's some mystery here. I said in the message, in fact, we don't know all that's going on here. But it appears that there's a sincere belief that this will produce the sheep and goats that you want. And it may be that he's doing something here that the text doesn't tell us that does actually have some scientific basis, but we don't know. Okay. Probably the biggest thing we derive from this is that the word white figures prominently. The word poplar in Hebrew means white. He strips these sticks so that they look white, and the name Laban is white. And so my guess is that something here is happening in a literary fashion to say Jacob is stripping Laban. Okay. Yeah.
In addition to the sticks, Jacob has this plan to breed the stronger animals when he places the sticks out,
Right.
and the feebler animals when the sticks aren't out.
Right.
And in this way, he's cheating Laban, if you will, or he's got a plan. Is it shrewdness that we're looking at here? Is this an example of that we ought to follow or not?
Jacob is playing by the rules established. Okay. So I don't think that he's necessarily doing anything wrong as much as he is trying to take advantage of the rules as they exist. You remember Laban did something far worse in taking all of the striped and spotted animals when they had agreed upon Jacob gets them. He took them all out before they ever started. Mm-hmm. And then in chapter 31, Jacob reveals that Laban changes the rules. His statement is 10 times. Who knows whether that 10 just means over and over and over again, or it's literally the number 10. Either way, Laban is a pretty shrewd guy himself, and I think that Jacob is simply trying to take advantage of the rules as they exist. I don't think that it's wrong. I'm not sure that it's a pattern that we ought to follow as much as it is a fact of life that sometimes in the competition in the marketplace, there's times where you take advantage of market conditions.
Mm-hmm. Jacob was interested in building his own wealth. I mean, he was looking to build his own wealth. Does building your own wealth equal building your own kingdom?
It can be, but it doesn't have to be. There is nothing wrong with seeking to improve one's status or business or anything like that. But when it becomes an idol, when it becomes our passion ahead of serving the Lord, any time that becomes even an interference in our worship and service of the Lord, it is misplaced and idolatrous, and that idol needs to be smashed. But the fact of seeking success in business is not in itself sinful or wrong.
Mm-hmm. You have made really clear that Christians shouldn't be building their own kingdoms.
Yes.
and that God is going to build his kingdom.
Yes.
And you said something on Sunday that was interesting, that no one helps God build their kingdom. I forget your exact words, but when you think about should we be building a kingdom at all, no one should be building a kingdom, neither ours nor God's.
Right.
But isn't there a proper place for a Christian to be in partnership with God in building his kingdom? What might that look like?
Yeah. I'm really glad that this question got asked, because it's something that I have really thought through carefully, and I've actually changed my mind on it over the years. I used to use phrases like, let's partner with God in his work, that kind of thing. And quite often we will see in Christian literature, well, let us partner with God in serving him and all of that. As I read through the Bible, I don't see that. I see that God calls us to serve him, and the word serve is sometimes a synonym for worship, because the Greek word, for example, of serve also means worship. And so I think that God calls us into service and to worship, but you will look in vain for called into partnership. God alone can build his kingdom. He does call us to serve him as king. He's the king. We're not. When we use the word partnership, it kind of develops the idea that we're sitting here right next to God, and he and I are thinking a lot the same way, and anyone out there who opposes us is therefore opposing God. And we can look with great kind of jaundiced view at anyone then who opposes us, because we assume that since we're in God's work and we're partnered with him, that these folks are opposing God. And many Christian ministers, I think, fall down on this point. Though, in fact, the more you are engaged in Christian ministry, the easier the temptation becomes to think that you are partnered with God. I get that we're linked with God. I get that we serve him. God alone builds his kingdom, and we would do well to recognize that problem.
Jacob is reminded here in the story that there was a particular place and a particular time, Bethel,
Yes.
where he came to the conclusion for himself that the Lord will be my God.
I think he gets saved at the stairway.
Yeah.
Yes.
As we go through our Christian lives, and we get further and further away from our own conversion experience, do we need to remind ourselves of our conversion experience, those moments where we were particularly close to God? Is this an important part of our own walk?
I think very much so. That as we look back on the freshness of how it was when we first became believers, when we see a person become a believer and the way in which they freshly look at the gospel, it reminds us again of what God did for us. When we look back on our baptism and we remember that that was a moment we settled the score of saying, I'm belong to Jesus and I want the world to know it. Every time we participate in communion, we're reminding ourselves that we have been changed and transformed. The ordinances are there to help us recall what God has done. And I think that God showing up in the person of Jesus, I believe, when he said that this messenger of God says, I am the God of Bethel, showing up to Jacob and saying, remember what happened there? You set up the stone. He's reminding him of his salvation and saying, now I'm going to be with you. 20 years almost after the fact, he gets this beautiful reminder.
One of the things that the Lord gives to Jacob is some instruction. It's time to leave.
Yes.
And Jacob communicates with Leah and Rachel that God has said it's time to go.
Yeah.
I am leaving my employment. I am headed to a place where you ladies have never been before. And these sisters, they agree.
Yeah.
They say, okay, let's go. How can wives be supportive of their husbands who make big decisions about employment and where they're going to live?
Yeah. So I think I could turn the question around first to say, what can men do to help their wives come to good conclusions together? Okay. So notice that Jacob doesn't just assert his authority. He takes these two gals out into a field where they can't be overheard. There's a way in which they're able to speak freely. Okay. And then he lays out a case very carefully to them. He doesn't assume that they're just going to agree, nor does he assume they're going to disagree. He just lays out a case. So here's an example where I think that our text does give us some clear help. As he lays out the case, the women recognize, yes, that's right, and that's right, and that's right, and then they add to it. The fact is that Dad didn't come through for us in providing, whether it was a dowry or some way of provision. He cheated us too, and so they are all in saying, yeah, we agree with you. And I think that it starts with the husband being sensitive and caring, and even to the details of trying to have a conversation that's not in the public, or people can overhear, or people can speak freely, where he can lay out his case carefully rather than asserting his authority. And then the wives being able to have their own say and having a discussion about it, and then coming to a conclusion together. I think that's a beautiful picture of how we can reach conclusions as a family as well.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Ask Scott podcast. You can find the Ask Scott podcast on our YouTube channel that is at East White Oak. You can follow East White Oak Bible Church on Facebook and on Instagram. We look forward to you joining us the next time when Pastor Scott will answer your questions about the Bible on the Ask Scott podcast.